Well, we are here to honor the moms tonight and worship a little bit, and worship together in fellowship and all. So I think I'll pray afterwards. I think that'll be better because I want to pronounce a blessing on all the moms. So if you can't hear me, let me know. I'll try to be a little bit louder. But I did hear about this mother. She had 2 young boys that were known for their mischievous behavior. So anytime trouble occurred, they were certain to be part of it. And so she decided to take them to the pastor one at a time. Pastor said to the first young boy, "Son, where is God?" He sat there silently, and he asked again, "Where is God?" And still no reply. The third time he asked, the boy bolted out the door, ran home, and said to his brother, "God is missing, and they think that we did it."
That's a great one.
Yes.
Mischievous. Some of you know kids that are kind of like that. A little bit, those darn boys. Yeah, exactly. I watched a sermon this past week that Jeannie put me onto from Dr. Mark Batterson, and it was called Gradually and Then Suddenly. So it's out there on YouTube if you're interested in that. Pretty cool sermon. But as I was listening to it, there was a 2-minute segment there that I zeroed in on and capitalized on, and I want to talk to you about that 2-minute segment from that, basically, in honor of Mother's Day. And so it can also apply to the guys too, but just in honor of Mother's Day, I thought that I would kind of talk a little bit about this. There are so many people in the Bible that we don't know. You know, we know the names of certain people, and you know they're going to be there in prominence and all. But there's so many people in the Bible that it just briefly mentions names, and we don't really know that much about them. But we have to understand the story behind them. And there were 2 women who was named Shiphrah and Puah. Okay, you probably never heard of them. Shiphrah and Puah. But they are in Exodus 1. So the king of Egypt, and who would the king of Egypt have been?
Pharaoh.
Would have been Pharaoh, right? And so the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah. 15, sorry. Exodus 1:15. Shiphrah and Puah. Verse number 16. When you help the Hebrew women give birth, observe them on their birth stools. If the child is a son, kill him. But if it is a daughter, let her live. Verse 17 says, the midwives, however, feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had instructed. They let the boys live. Now, this is the first instance of civil disobedience in the Bible, because Pharaoh could have killed them for doing this, because his word was law, right? So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? And the midwives answered Pharaoh, the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous, and they give birth before the midwife even arrives. So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. So not only was it the first instance of civil disobedience, but also they lied to the king, basically, you know, because they were part of the births and things, but they kind of sidestepped a little bit with that. So Shiphrah and Puah, okay? Now, it's kind of interesting because that decision that they made had ramifications for generations to come. And the reason being is that when we look at Exodus 1 and the king talks to them to do that, remember that when he was talking to them, their entire calling, the midwives' entire calling, was to protect the children, right? So for them to step out and for them to do what Pharaoh told them to do would be totally against their Hippocratic oath, if nothing else. They didn't have it back then. It wasn't Hippocrates, but you know what I'm saying. Do no harm, right? And so it was totally against that, because what their whole situation is to protect the children in the womb, because they would go along with these women for 9 months as they were getting ready to give birth. And even if it was a son that came out, they wouldn't do any harm to the baby then, right? The king of Egypt, Pharaoh, of course, he was the most powerful man on earth, and commanded them to do the exact opposite. But we know what this was at this point, because Pharaoh did not want the Hebrews to multiply, because he thought that if they multiplied and they got so many Hebrews there, that they basically would overpower the Egyptians and take over, right? And so this was a form of ethnic cleansing even back then in Exodus 1, And so he orders every baby boy to be killed, but the midwives had a higher authority. It's okay for us to obey the laws as long as it doesn't go against the laws of God. Now, that doesn't mean that you can run red lights. Doesn't mean you can have civil disobedience and that type of thing, unless it goes against the laws of God. And so these midwives understood that. And so they feared God more than they did actually Pharaoh. Okay? When we look at Exodus, who is the main character that's the hero in Exodus? Moses, right? Okay? Because Moses was the one who encountered the burning bush. He was the one who came into Pharaoh and did all the miracles. He was the one who came into Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go, because this is what the Lord says." And then once Pharaoh let them go, he led them out of Egypt and into the wilderness. And then they got to the Red Sea, and he was the one that stretched out his staff and parted the Red Sea. And then finally, when they got into the wilderness, he was the one that went up on Mount Sinai and got the 10 Commandments, the same 10 Commandments that we use in our judicial system today, 4,000, 6,000 years later, right? Mm-hmm. So Moses was kind of the hero. Moses would not be in existence if it wasn't for those two midwives. If it wasn't for them actually taking care of the baby boys, right? Because what happened is that when they were obeying God, it was passed down from generation to generation, okay? But Moses never sees the light of day without the courage of those women who refused to obey Pharaoh on that, right? And so God uses them in order to deliver his people out of that Egyptian bondage, right? Because God is interested in the bigger story. He's interested in what's going to happen there, right? And so we can look at that and we can see, what if Moses was aborted, right? What if he was killed after birth? Then Israel wouldn't have been delivered. There would be no Moses, there would be no Exodus, there would be no crossing the Red Sea, there would be no 10 Commandments, okay? So when we think about this, we think about it that that every dream has a genealogy, every blessing has a genealogy, and every story has a backstory with these two women that were there, right? And you and I are all influenced by people who were influenced by other people who were influenced by other people. Because really there's nothing new under the sun. There's very few discoveries that come about that are actually new, right? Somebody had to put something together, and then somebody built upon that and built upon that and built upon that, okay? So what's the whole point of this? The whole point of it is that when we talk to moms at Mother's Day, when we talk to dads at Father's Day, there are certain situations that you and I as parents have set into motion with our children, with our grandchildren, with our great-grandchildren. And it kind of goes back to that movie with George Bailey, Jimmy Stewart, It's a Wonderful Life, right? Clarence gives him the ability to see what the world would be like if he had never been born, right? And of course, the whole purpose of the story is to show that the town and all of the people that were influenced and everything would be far worse off if George Bailey had not been born, right? So when you and I look at that, what we have to understand is we have to look at things generationally. There are so many people that don't because they're just living for today. They're just living for what's happening here now. How much wealth can I get now? All of that, and they're not looking to future generations. They're not looking to what it is that we're putting it into. Now, the first things that happens is that when we start thinking about that as moms or as dads, what's the first thing that comes to mind when we're looking back at kids that we have influenced or raised? Exactly. Automatic negative thoughts are failures. Things we did wrong. That's exactly right. Because that is the thing that stands out to us, right? The things that we failed at, the things that we did wrong. But the thing about it is, and we learned this, of course, by experience, as all of you did, kids don't come with owner's manuals, right? No matter how many books that you read about child rearing, I remember a particular person that was very popular when we were in college, and it was, I won't even mention the name, but he had written books on, how you're supposed to raise your kids, and, this is the way you discipline them, and this is the way you teach them spiritual principles and all this kind of stuff. And come to find out, there was this guy that was very vehement, you got to raise them like this guy says and everything. And I asked him one day, I said, how many kids does he have? Oh, well, he doesn't have any kids at all. And I'm like, and I was just in college. We had not even been married yet, And I'm like, are you nuts? You're going to raise your kids according to this guy who's telling you how to raise it, and he's never had kids before? It's like, yeah, well, I knew all about raising kids until I had kids, right? And that's the way it is, because they don't come with owner's manuals. And unfortunately, the firstborn is usually the one that is the trial and error, right? They kind of get the brunt of everything because parents, yes, Jeannie's firstborn. How many of you are firstborns? Raise your hand.
What marriage? No.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, okay. So you can relate to that because we don't know. Your parents didn't know. We didn't know. You didn't know. And so there was a lot of different mistakes that we might have made or, whatever. It's kind of interesting because when you study Freud and his psychoanalysis, he was the main one that brought in the tradition of kind of blaming the parents for the neglect, for the over-involvement, for the emotional dysfunction, especially the mother, right? The distress, the relationship, the maladjustment, all of those type of things, right? And he was kind of the one who brought all of that in. And then as we look at it, we have kind of a whole generation right now that is really their battle cry is, well, it's because of what mom and dad did to me. This is what messed me up. This is what fouled me up. And we don't take into consideration that there comes a time when you become an adult or whatever, and you got to stand on your own 2 feet, and you got to own up to your own mistakes. And so, and kind of closing with this, my birth mother, Sandra Sue Bigham, was born 3 months after, or 3 months before the Pearl Harbor attack. Okay. December 7th, 1941. Okay, that was when Pearl Harbor was attacked. So she was born 3 months before that, right? In 1959, she was 17 years old. How many of you can remember when you were 17 years old? You had the world by the tail, and you knew everything that there was to know when you were 17, right? You were experts on everything. That's exactly right. And now you look back on it, and you're like, I was an idiot. You know? I have had to go back, and I have had to contact some of my high school friends and apologize to them for some of the stupid things that I did when I was 17, right? Now, some of you don't have that opportunity. I particularly did. And so, and some of those friends that I apologized to were great friends today. We keep in contact. I send the messages out to them, you know, twice a week, all that type of thing. But I had to go back and say, you know what, I was a real jerk in high school to you, and I'm really sorry, right? Because I'm 67 years old now, and I know what I was like when I was 16, 17, right? Okay, so anyway, so my birth mom was 17 years old when she had me, right? My birth father was 18 years old. And that was very young. And this was the end of the 50s. So this was 1959. This was not like it is today with all of the adoption and all of the, you know, stuff that was going on. And so the fact that I was adopted is really a miracle within itself. Because back then, she could have had an abortion. It wasn't legal or anything, but it could have, you know, a back alley abortion was quite common back then because of that. And so, so with my birth situation, God allowed that to happen and for me to be adopted, because if I hadn't, then our kids and our grandkids would not be there, right? And that's the way that it is with all of us too. Now, I can't look back on my birth mother and blame her for some of my issues because she was 17 years old, you know? I can't look back and blame my birth father for some of the issues. And I found out later, and I've shared this with you, that his family wanted to adopt me, and they were not allowed to, right? So it's like I went through all of those things, and God put me in the Rhodes family with Wilma and Raymond Rhodes to raise me, and to raise me in the fear and the admonition of the Lord, and to raise me in a Bible-believing home, in a Spirit-filled home. And I would enter the ministry when I was still in high school, basically, and
Under, by the way, Marilyn Hickey's church.
under Marilyn Hickey's church, who Marilyn Hickey has just passed away. Yeah, exactly. And so so there were so many things like that I can look back on my life, and later on I had to deal with abandonment issues. But even when I was dealing with abandonment issues, I couldn't go back and I couldn't blame my parents because of that. Because it was something that was in me. And it was something that happened. And it was something that somebody didn't intend to happen, but they were doing the best they could. And that is kind of the bottom line with what I'm talking about to you. Because we look back on things and we think, you know, I failed, I've messed up. If only I had done this, if only I had loved more, if only I had bonded more, if, you know, whatever it is. And we look back on those things, and Satan wants to pounce on that and wants to make you guilty of those things, when there is some times that you just have to let yourself off the hook, you know, and say, I was doing the best I could with what I knew. I was running with what revelation that I had at the time. Right? Mm-hmm. And to understand that you are influencing generations to come, just as these two midwives did. That they knew that they could obey Pharaoh and they would be better off civically, but they looked to the higher power. They looked to what God said. And they disobeyed that, And they were able to bring Moses into the world with that so that he could deliver the children of Israel. Okay? And that basically is the message that I wanted to give to you. Yeah, isn't that cool? So what I want to do is I want to bless you ladies and on Mom's Day, and I will bless the fathers on Father's Day. But I wanted to bless all of you moms, even though you may not receive the blessing from some of your children or your children tomorrow, because there are some that we have things, just the way it is. And so I want to bless you tonight, and I want to bless you with long life and with the wisdom of nurturing your children, nurturing your grandchildren, nurturing your great-grandchildren. And I bless you with the honor of your family and the peace that passes all understanding, because the Lord has called you blessed in many, many different scriptures, including Proverbs 31 and various ones. The Lord calls you blessed. And when the Lord calls you blessed, then you are blessed. Right? So, Father, I thank you for all of these women that are here. I thank you for what they mean in their children's lives and in their grandchildren's lives and in their great-grandchildren's lives. And, Father, let us never lessen that. Let us always understand that even though we're not perfect, that you have put us in the place that you have put us in for a reason and for a purpose, and that we are affecting generations to come. And Lord, I thank you for that. And I bless you for that, and I bless these women, that they would be strong in you, and that they would be mighty, and that they would be wise, and that they would know that they are loved. And Father, I thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.